In the summer of 2018, the island of Bali was bathed in golden sunlight, its beaches alive with the rhythmic sound of waves and the chatter of tourists from around the world. The lush rice terraces glimmered under the warm sun, and the scent of frangipani flowers floated in the air. Bali had long been a haven for honeymooners, a place where romance could blossom in an atmosphere of exotic charm. It was here, in this idyllic setting, that the paths of two very different lives crossed. A wealthy American businessman named Richard Whitmore and a young Indonesian woman named Ayu Lestari. Richard Whitmore was 71 years old, a man whose life had been shaped by hard work, sharp business instincts, and an unshakable belief that money could solve most problems. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, in 1947, Richard had made his fortune in the real estate market during the boom years of the 1980s and 1990s. By the time he retired in his late 60s, his portfolio included several luxury properties across the United States, a yacht anchored in Florida, and a collection of rare vintage cars. Yet for all his wealth, Richard's personal life had been marked by loneliness. Twice divorced and with grown children who kept their distance, he had started traveling extensively, seeking companionship in faraway places. In contrast, Ayu Lestari was only 27, born in a small fishing village on the outskirts of Denpasar. Life had never been easy for her. Her father, a fisherman, had died at sea when she was just 10 years old, leaving her mother to raise 3 children on a meager income from selling fish at the local market. By the time Ayu reached her late teens, she had learned the art of survival, working as a waitress, a tour guide, and occasionally modeling for local travel brochures. Her beauty was undeniable: dark almond-shaped eyes, long black hair, and a delicate smile that could make strangers feel instantly welcome. But behind that smile was an unspoken frustration at the limits of her life and the opportunities she felt she had been denied. The two met in July 2018 at a luxury beachfront resort in Seminyak. Richard had been staying there for a month, enjoying the island's slower pace while indulging in fine dining, spa treatments, and private tours. Ayu was working as part of the resort's guest relations staff, assigned to assist VIP visitors. Their first meeting was almost accidental. Richard had asked for help arranging a private boat trip, and Ayu had been sent to coordinate the details. He was immediately taken by her warmth and attentiveness, while she noticed the way he casually signed bills without glancing at the total. Over the following days, Richard began requesting Ayu's assistance more often, from arranging sunset dinners on Jimbaran Beach to organizing private yoga sessions. By the end of the month, the two were spending much of their time together, both inside and outside the resort. Their relationship raised eyebrows among the staff, but neither seemed to care. Richard spoke openly about how Ayu had brought joy back into his life, while Ayu told her friends that Richard was kind and generous, though she never mentioned him in a romantic way. In early September 2018, Richard extended his stay in Bali and began discussing marriage. To him, the idea of settling down with Ayu seemed like a chance at a new beginning, a way to fill the emotional emptiness that had shadowed his later years. For Ayu, the proposal opened doors she had never imagined: financial security, travel abroad, and a life far removed from the crowded streets and small markets she had always known. But beneath the surface of this seemingly romantic union, there were unspoken doubts and unshared truths. Richard knew little about Ayu's past, about the friends she spent time with when she was not at the resort, or the debts her family had accumulated. Ayu, in turn, knew only fragments of Richard's personal history, and she underestimated the protective instincts he had developed over decades in business. By late September, the couple was legally married in a small private ceremony in Nusa Dua. There were no family members present, only 2 witnesses from the resort staff and a local registrar. The celebration was understated: champagne, a quiet dinner, and a walk along the beach under the moonlight. To outsiders, it seemed like the perfect conclusion to a whirlwind romance. But as the gentle waves lapped at the shore that night, the seeds of a deadly future were already being planted. This was not simply the story of a May-December marriage. It was the beginning of a sequence of events that would lead, within months, to betrayal, violence, and death, events that would shock both the island community and the international media. Following their quiet wedding in late September 2018, Richard Whitmore and Ayu Lestari began their married life on the island of Bali. The couple chose to settle temporarily in a spacious villa located in the upscale neighborhood of Sanur, a place known for its calm beaches and laid-back atmosphere. The villa was a symbol of Richard's wealth. A large modern home with polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass doors opening onto a lush garden, and a private swimming pool glistening under the tropical sun. For Au, this was a world far removed from the modest wooden house she had grown up in. The contrast was stark, but for the moment, it felt like a dream come true. Richard spent his days mostly at the villa, occasionally visiting local restaurants or meeting with a few business contacts who happened to be vacationing in Bali. Despite his advancing age, he was sharp and detail-oriented, often reviewing documents or making calls on his sleek smartphone. He had a reputation for being a shrewd businessman and a cautious man, traits that had helped him accumulate and maintain his fortune. Though he was not especially talkative about his past, those who knew him described Richard as a man who valued loyalty and security above all else. Au, meanwhile, embraced her new role as a wife and socialite. She enjoyed the freedom that came with financial stability and the ability to dress in designer clothes, dine in fine restaurants, and visit art galleries and spas that had once been out of reach. At first, Au appeared genuinely grateful for the life Richard was providing. She made efforts to integrate into the social circles of wealthy expatriates living in Bali, attending charity events and cocktail parties with Richard by her side. The locals who observed the couple noted their age difference but were generally supportive, thinking it was just another story of love crossing unexpected boundaries. However, beneath this veneer of happiness, tensions began to emerge. Richard's grown children from previous marriages, living in the United States, expressed concerns over the sudden marriage. They questioned Au's motives and worried about their father's vulnerability. Several called Richard to warn him, urging him to be cautious and not to be blinded by the excitement of a new relationship in a foreign country. Richard, however, was resolute. He dismissed their worries as jealousy or misunderstanding, stating that Au brought him comfort and companionship in his later years. Au herself carried a mix of hope and uncertainty. She knew her life was changing drastically but was also aware of the limitations imposed by her background. There were whispers among her friends about the speed of the marriage and the age gap, but Au did not speak of her doubts. Instead, she focused on maintaining appearances. Financial matters, though, soon became a source of quiet friction. Richard was generous but cautious with money, preferring to manage his wealth through trusted advisors. Au, on the other hand, began making small requests, luxury items, trips, and gifts for her family back home. Though Richard agreed at first, he occasionally expressed discomfort with her spending habits. In the weeks that followed, Au started to reconnect with some old acquaintances from Denpasar and the surrounding areas. Some of these friends lived difficult lives, struggling with poverty and debts. Au confided in a few, revealing that life with Richard was not as perfect as it appeared. She spoke of feelings of isolation and frustration with the slow pace of her new life. A few of her friends, sensing opportunity, suggested that with Richard's fortune so close, there could be ways to speed things up, hinting at schemes that went beyond the limits of the law. Despite these warnings, Richard remained unaware of the undercurrents growing beneath the surface. He continued to trust Au implicitly, often leaving her in charge of household affairs and financial decisions within certain limits. Their relationship, while cordial, lacked the depth of true understanding. Richard was a man used to control and logic. Au was navigating a new world of wealth and privilege, sometimes feeling trapped between gratitude and ambition. The villa itself became a stage for the unfolding drama. Neighbors occasionally noticed Au receiving visitors at odd hours, people who did not fit into the usual expat circles. There were murmurs about loud conversations and occasional arguments, but nothing concrete. Richard, due to his age and trusting nature, brushed off such rumors as distractions. As the rainy season approached in late October, the atmosphere inside the villa grew tense. Au's mood would shift unpredictably. At times she seemed affectionate and devoted, while at others she was distant and secretive. Richard, preoccupied with his business dealings abroad via phone calls and emails, did not fully grasp the emotional distance widening between them. He attributed it to the stresses of adjustment and the unfamiliar surroundings. Outside the villa, the Bali Police Department had been experiencing a rise in petty crimes and burglaries in the area, mostly targeting tourists. While these incidents were generally non-violent, they contributed to an increasing sense of unease among residents and visitors alike. Rumors circulated about organized groups exploiting the busy tourist season, and the authorities increased patrols in popular neighborhoods including Sanur. Amid this climate, the fragile balance of Richard and Ayu's marriage was about to be shattered. Unbeknownst to Richard, Ayu was being drawn deeper into a dangerous plan, one that would combine betrayal and violence in a way that no one expected. The idyllic paradise of Bali, with its golden sunsets and calm seas, was about to witness a tragedy that would leave lasting scars on its community. By early November 2018, the subtle tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface of Richard and Ayu's relationship began to boil over. The rainy season had settled fully in Bali, bringing cooler nights and occasional downpours that transformed the island streets into slick, glistening pathways. The gentle tranquility that had once surrounded the villa in Sanur was replaced with a growing sense of unease, not only within the household but also in the local community. On the morning of November 5th, a Monday, Richard woke early as usual. His routine was rigid and disciplined. A quick swim in the pool, a strong cup of black coffee, followed by a review of emails and messages on his laptop. That day, however, Ayu was unusually quiet. She avoided eye contact and seemed distracted as she prepared breakfast. Richard, sensing something was off, asked gently if she was feeling well. Ayu smiled faintly but avoided giving a direct answer. What Richard did not know was that behind that faint smile, Ayu was grappling with growing financial pressures and emotional turmoil. Her family back in Denpasar had fallen into deeper debt after her mother's small business suffered a setback. Friends who had encouraged her to seek a solution involving Richard's wealth had become more insistent, whispering about ways to make things right. Ayu was caught between loyalty to her family and fear of the consequences if she betrayed her husband. Over the next few days, Ayu's behavior became increasingly secretive. She started making phone calls in hushed tones and receiving visitors late at night, always ensuring Richard was asleep or out of the villa. One such visitor was Dua, a man known locally for his involvement in petty crimes and gambling debts. Dua had been a childhood acquaintance of Ayu's, and their renewed contact stirred memories as well as dangerous ideas. On the afternoon of November 8th, Richard left the villa to attend a business meeting with potential investors staying at a hotel in downtown Denpasar. He expected to be gone for several hours, giving Ayu the house to herself. It was during this time that Ayu and Dua met in the villa's living room. The two discussed a plan, one that would involve staging a robbery to cover up a much darker intention. The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. Ayu intended to lure Richard into a vulnerable situation, during which the robbery would appear to be a violent crime committed by outsiders. The goal was to steal valuable possessions and money, while ensuring Richard would be unable to identify the perpetrators. Ayu's hope was to cover her tracks and provide her family with enough money to solve their immediate problems, believing that the law enforcement response would be limited to a typical burglary investigation. However, things quickly escalated beyond the initial plan. Dua, who had debts to repay and no qualms about violence, proposed a more brutal approach, insisting that Richard must be incapacitated during the event to prevent interference. Ayu hesitated but, pushed by desperation and the fear of losing everything, reluctantly agreed. On the evening of November 9th, as the sun set behind the mountains and a cool breeze swept through Sanur, the stage was set. Richard returned home around 7 p.m., tired but pleased after a successful meeting. Ayu greeted him with a warm smile, masking her anxiety. Dinner was prepared and served in silence, with Ayu deliberately keeping conversation minimal. Richard, sensing her mood but choosing not to press, retired early to his study to review documents. Around 10 p.m. Ayu excused herself, claiming she needed to get some fresh air by the pool. Moments later, Dua arrived, climbing quietly through a side gate. The plan unfolded swiftly. Ayu distracted Richard in the living room while Dua moved to secure the house and prepare to execute the staged robbery. But the plan went wrong almost immediately. Richard, despite his age, was physically strong and mentally alert. When Dua attempted to confront him, Richard resisted fiercely. A struggle ensued, loud enough to awaken neighbors and alert passers-by. In the chaos, Dua lost control and struck Richard with a blunt object, causing severe injury. Hearing the commotion, Ayu panicked. Instead of calling for help or stopping the violence, she urged Dua to finish the act quickly. Richard's pleas and groans echoed through the villa as Dua, fueled by anger and desperation, administered a fatal blow. The staged robbery had turned into a murder. Afterward, Ayu and Dua hurriedly ransacked the villa, taking expensive jewelry, cash, and a few electronic devices. The scene was left to appear as a violent break-in gone wrong, with signs of forced entry at a rear window and furniture overturned in haste. Ayu called emergency services, her voice trembling as she reported the burglary and Richard's collapse. Within minutes, neighbors and local police arrived. The villa was cordoned off as investigators began their work. Ayu was taken aside for questioning but maintained her composure, presenting herself as a grieving widow shocked by the violent intrusion. The incident sent ripples through the community and media. News outlets reported on the attack against the wealthy American businessman in a tranquil Balinese neighborhood. Speculation was rife, but concrete details were scarce. The initial assumption was a robbery that had escalated unpredictably, a tragic consequence of rising crime targeting tourists and expatriates. However, the seeds of suspicion had been planted. Investigators noted inconsistencies in Ayu's statements and the unusual nature of the break-in. Questions arose about the timing, the lack of forced entry signs matching the damage inside, and Ayu's unusual calmness under pressure. Moreover, surveillance footage from nearby streets was missing crucial hours during the incident, adding to the mystery. For Ayu, the aftermath was a mix of relief and dread. She had achieved the immediate goal of accessing Richard's wealth but knew that unraveling the truth could bring dire consequences. Her world, once full of hope and promise, now teetered on the edge of disaster. The inciting incident, the fatal night in the villa, set in motion a complex investigation, leading to revelations that would shock Bali and beyond. The day after the tragic event at the villa in Sanur, November 10, 2018, the Bali Police Department quickly mobilized a team to investigate the circumstances surrounding Richard Whitmore's death. The incident had drawn considerable attention, not only because of Richard's wealth and foreign nationality but also due to the unusual nature of the reported robbery. At the outset, the local police treated the case as a violent burglary gone wrong. Officers arrived promptly at the scene early that morning, taking control of the property and securing the area to preserve potential evidence. Crime scene investigators began methodically examining the villa, cataloging signs of forced entry, collecting fingerprints, and photographing the interior for any clues. The overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and broken glass suggested a hurried search, but several inconsistencies caught the attention of the lead investigator, Inspector Wayan Surya. The first puzzling detail was the point of entry. The window that reportedly had been forced open showed no fresh damage consistent with a violent break-in. The lock appeared intact, and no visible scratches or tool marks were found on the surrounding frame. Moreover, the glass shards on the floor did not match the expected pattern from a forced entry but looked as if they had been deliberately placed or staged. Inside the villa, the investigators found Richard's body in the living room, lying in a pool of blood near a shattered vase. The forensic team conducted a preliminary examination on site, noting the severe trauma to his head and signs of defensive wounds on his hands and forearms. The scene suggested a struggle, but the brutality was unexpected in a typical burglary case. Meanwhile, Ayu was interviewed extensively. She maintained the narrative of a surprise attack by unknown intruders who had entered while Richard was working late. Her calm demeanor puzzled some officers, though her account remained consistent. Ayu insisted she had been in the bedroom preparing for bed and had no prior knowledge of the event until the noise awakened her. Inspector Surya and his team decided to widen the scope of their investigation. They reviewed neighborhood security camera footage from surrounding streets and nearby businesses. To their frustration, footage from the night of November 9th was missing or corrupted during the critical hours. This lack of visual evidence hindered progress but also raised suspicions about possible tampering or deliberate interference. In the days following the incident, police began interviewing villa staff, neighbors, and acquaintances of both Richard and Ayu. Staff at the resort where Ayu previously worked spoke of her close relationship with Richard and noted the speed at which their marriage had developed. Some neighbors mentioned hearing raised voices and unusual visitors to the villa in the weeks prior to the incident. These reports, though circumstantial, began painting a picture at odds with the peaceful facade Ayu projected. Financial investigations were launched to track recent transactions from Richard's accounts. The discovery of several large withdrawals and transfers shortly before his death intensified the suspicion surrounding Ayu. Additionally, investigators found communications between Ayu and several individuals known to local law enforcement for criminal activity, including Dua, a man with a history of theft and violent offenses. Under mounting pressure, Ayu's story started to show cracks. When questioned about the missing surveillance footage and her relationship with Dua, she grew defensive, claiming ignorance and denying any involvement in wrongdoing. Yet inconsistencies in her timeline and discrepancies between witness statements made her increasingly a person of interest. Throughout the investigation, Inspector Surya maintained a delicate balance, mindful of the high-profile nature of the case and the international scrutiny it attracted. He coordinated closely with the U.S. Embassy and forensic experts brought in to assist with the case. The goal was to uncover the truth swiftly and fairly, while managing the sensitivities surrounding a foreign victim and a local suspect. As evidence mounted, it became clear this was not a simple robbery. The involvement of someone close to Richard, the staging of the crime scene, and the financial motives suggested a more sinister plot. The police began preparing for the possibility that Ayu was more than just a grieving widow, that she might have orchestrated the entire event. This phase of the investigation marked a turning point, shifting the focus from random criminals to premeditated betrayal. It set the stage for further discoveries that would expose hidden alliances, deepen the mystery, and ultimately bring justice for Richard Whitmore. As the investigation progressed into late November 2018, new and unexpected revelations began to emerge, dramatically altering the course of the case. What initially seemed to be a straightforward, albeit tragic, robbery and murder now unfolded into a complex web of deceit and betrayal, exposing layers of hidden motives and alliances. Inspector Wayan Surya and his team had spent weeks piecing together evidence, carefully analyzing financial records, phone logs, and witness testimonies. The breakthrough came when a routine forensic examination uncovered DNA traces on a discarded glove found near the villa's back gate. The DNA did not match any known criminals in the Bali police database, but cross-referencing it with international records revealed a surprising match. It belonged to Dua, the man Ayu had reconnected with shortly before the murder. Further investigations into Dua's background revealed a history much darker than petty thefts and gambling debts. He had been linked to a small but organized group involved in targeting wealthy tourists and expatriates, specializing in staged robberies designed to cover up internal disputes or personal vendettas. More disturbingly, police discovered that Dua had been under surveillance for possible involvement in violent crimes, but lack of concrete evidence had prevented his arrest. The biggest shock, however, came when intercepted phone conversations showed frequent and secretive communication between Ayu and Dua in the weeks leading up to the murder. These calls suggested that the two had been collaborating closely, planning the robbery, and by extension Richard's murder, well in advance. The recorded conversations contained coded language hinting at solving problems and securing the future, phrases investigators now understood to mean eliminating obstacles and obtaining money by any means necessary. Confronted with this evidence, Ayu's defense began to unravel. Despite her initial denials, she was arrested and charged with complicity in the murder of her husband. Yet even as the case against her strengthened, new questions arose about her exact role. Was she a willing conspirator, or had she been coerced by Dua and his associates? Did she act out of desperation, greed, or a mixture of both? Adding to the intrigue, statements from Ayu's friends painted a conflicted picture. Some described her as a woman trapped by circumstances beyond her control, pressured by family debts and threats from dangerous people. Others suggested that Ayu had grown increasingly resentful of Richard, viewing him as a barrier to the life she wanted to lead. There were rumors of secret meetings, unexplained withdrawals from Richard's accounts, and hints of a romantic relationship between Ayu and Dua, though nothing concrete was confirmed. Meanwhile, forensic experts delved deeper into the crime scene. Analysis of the villa's layout and the nature of the injuries suggested that Richard had fought fiercely to defend himself. The timing of the attack and the presence of multiple assailants were confirmed by further evidence, including partial fingerprints and footprints inconsistent with those of Ayu and Dua alone. This indicated the possible involvement of additional conspirators or accomplices. Amid these developments, the case attracted growing media attention, with international outlets following the story closely. The narrative shifted from a tragic burglary to a scandalous murder plot, fueled by betrayal and greed. Public opinion polarized, with some sympathizing with Ayu's difficult background and others condemning her as a cold-hearted criminal. Inspector Surya found himself at the center of a challenging investigation, balancing pressure from the media, demands for justice from Richard's family, and the complexities of a legal system strained by high-profile cases. He coordinated with prosecutors to ensure that all evidence was meticulously documented and that Ayu's rights were respected throughout the process. The twist in the plot also deepened the mystery of missing surveillance footage. Technical experts discovered that the deletion had not been accidental but the result of deliberate tampering. Further forensic analysis traced the interference to a device connected to Ayu's mobile phone, suggesting she had orchestrated the erasure to cover her tracks. By the end of November, it was clear that the story was far from over. The investigation had exposed a network of criminal activities linked to the murder, involving not only Ayu and Dua but potentially others yet to be identified. It also raised broader questions about the vulnerabilities faced by wealthy expatriates in Bali and the hidden dangers lurking beneath the island's paradise image. This midpoint revelation transformed the narrative from a simple crime to a tangled thriller of manipulation, desperation, and deadly consequences. It set the stage for the conflict to reach its peak, as the investigation pushed deeper into the heart of betrayal, and the truth threatened to destroy lives beyond those directly involved. December 2018 brought a chilling tension to the Bali community as the investigation into Richard Whitmore's murder deepened. The island's usual tranquility was overshadowed by media scrutiny, courtroom preparations, and the simmering turmoil surrounding the accused, Ayu Lestari. With mounting evidence against her, the situation became increasingly complex and volatile. Following Ayu's arrest, police intensified efforts to uncover the full scope of the criminal network connected to Dua and his associates. Surveillance footage and phone records revealed frequent meetings in secluded locations, warehouses and back alleys, where plans had been made not only for the robbery but also for concealing its aftermath. Several individuals, some known petty criminals and others unfamiliar to authorities, came under investigation as possible accomplices. The authorities feared they were facing a sophisticated operation rather than a lone act of desperation. Richard's family, who had initially been skeptical of Ayu, now called for justice, requesting cooperation from international law enforcement agencies. The U.S. Embassy in Jakarta became involved, facilitating communication and providing support for the investigation. Richard's adult children flew to Bali to attend legal proceedings, their grief deepened by suspicion and betrayal. They shared their doubts publicly, expressing concern over the motivations behind their father's untimely death. In court, Ayu's defense team mounted a vigorous campaign to portray her as a victim of circumstance. They argued that Ayu had been manipulated by Dua, coerced into participating under threats against her family. They presented testimony from friends and relatives describing her as a kind but vulnerable woman caught in a desperate situation. The defense sought to mitigate her responsibility, emphasizing the power imbalance and her limited options. Prosecutors, however, painted a starkly different picture. Using the extensive phone records, forensic evidence, and testimonies from local informants, they argued that Ayu had been the mastermind behind the plan. The premeditation, they insisted, was clear from the months of secret communications and careful orchestration. Prosecutors highlighted Ayu's financial motives and her apparent calmness following the murder as signs of guilt. Amid these legal battles, tensions flared within the local community. Some neighbors and former acquaintances of Ayu expressed shock and disbelief, struggling to reconcile the woman they knew with the accusations. Others voiced frustration at the ongoing fear of crime and the perception that justice was slow. The tourism industry, vital to Bali's economy, worried about the impact of the scandal on the island's reputation. The conflict extended beyond courtrooms and police stations. Ayu faced isolation and threats, both from those seeking retribution and from others who believed in her innocence. Her family in Denpasar distanced themselves, fearful of association. Dua, meanwhile, was held in a separate facility, refusing to cooperate and maintaining a hardened silence. Rumors swirled about attempts to intimidate witnesses and tamper with evidence, complicating the investigation. During this period, investigators uncovered more disturbing details. Financial audits revealed that Ayu had accessed Richard's accounts multiple times, transferring substantial sums to unknown recipients. Some transactions traced back to businesses linked with Dua's network, suggesting money laundering and complicity in broader criminal schemes. The scale of deception and greed became apparent, fueling public outrage. The rising conflict reached a personal level when Richard's children publicly accused Au of cold-hearted betrayal, questioning how a woman she claimed to love could be involved in such a brutal crime. Au's response, delivered through her legal counsel, was one of regret for the tragedy but firm denial of direct involvement in the murder itself. This public battle of narratives added layers of drama to the already tense atmosphere. As Christmas approached, Bali's festive spirit was subdued. The legal process promised a lengthy trial, with new evidence continually surfacing. The conflict between justice, truth, and perception created a palpable tension that affected not only those directly involved but the wider community. The island that once symbolized paradise had become a backdrop for tragedy and controversy. This period of rising conflict set the stage for the climax of the case. With stakes higher than ever, the truth was poised to come fully to light, forcing all parties to confront the consequences of their actions and the devastating impact of betrayal. In early 2019, after months of intense investigation and pretrial preparations, the courtroom in Denpasar became the stage for the final act in the tragic story of Richard Whitmore's death. The trial attracted widespread attention, with local media and international observers following each development closely. The courtroom was packed with family members, legal teams, journalists, and curious onlookers. The prosecution presented a strong case, laying out the evidence piece by piece. The financial transactions, the recorded communications between Au and Dua, forensic findings, and witness testimonies. They argued persuasively that Au had planned and orchestrated the robbery, fully aware that it would result in her husband's death. The defense maintained their claim that Au was manipulated and coerced, painting her as a victim caught in an impossible situation. After several weeks of hearings, the judge delivered a verdict that shocked some but reassured many seeking justice. Au Lestari was found guilty of complicity in murder and robbery. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, reflecting the severity of the crime and the premeditated nature of the attack. Dua, her accomplice, received a similarly harsh sentence for his direct role in the murder. The courtroom was heavy with emotion as the sentence was read. Richard's family expressed a sense of closure, though their grief remained profound. Au's relatives and supporters were visibly devastated, grappling with the harsh reality of the verdict. The community mourned the loss and hoped that the tragic events would serve as a reminder of the need for vigilance and justice. In the months that followed, the island of Bali slowly began to heal. The case spurred local authorities to improve security measures for residents and tourists alike, and initiatives were launched to address the underlying social issues that had contributed to the crime. Au's story became a cautionary tale about desperation, greed, and betrayal, a tragic reminder that even paradise can hide darkness beneath its surface. For Richard Whitmore, the story ended in sorrow but also in justice. His legacy, marked by decades of hard work and success, was overshadowed by the cruelty of his final days but remembered by those who knew him as a man who sought companionship and peace. For Au, the consequences were lifelong, a prison sentence and a future defined by choices made in moments of fear and ambition. Though the paradise of Bali reclaimed its calm and beauty, the story of the wealthy American businessman and the young local woman who betrayed him remained etched in the memories of those who witnessed the unfolding tragedy, a somber chapter in the island's history.